Hello, and welcome to a brand new discussion group on the Discworld by Terry Pratchett. We are going to be reading this series in publication order because that's how we like to do things. And today's discussion is going to be about the first two books, which are The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic. This might be the only time we do two books in one. It's just that these two books practically lend themselves to the same type of discussion, so it felt reasonable to group them together. With me, I have some friends from the Page Chewing Forum. Alex, could you start us off with introductions?
I'm Alex. I'm always found on the Page Chewing Forum and sometimes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and I'm trying to become an author very, very slowly.
Nice. Chris?
Me, my name's Chris Mullen from the Chronicle Chris YouTube channel and Speculative Speculations podcast and various other things that Varsha tells me to do. And you'll also find me in the Page Chewing forums as well. Author.
Was it?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jose. I run the Jose's Amazing Worlds YouTube channel, and I host the Fantasy Talks Live podcast, and can also be found on the Page Chewing forums. And I'm a little bit scared about today's conversation.
Scared. And I forgot to mention during the introduction, but as with pretty much any discussion group we do on the Page Chewing Forum, this is open to anybody interested in joining. So if you'd like to talk to us about these books, either here in the actual recordings or just on the forum threads, consider checking out the Page Chewing Forum. And now I want to go back and hear why Jose is scared of today's discussion.
I read these two books a long time ago, and then you said we're going to be discussing the whole Discworld. So like, that doesn't mean I have to reread the whole thing. Like, and is it going to be, I don't know, how many per month? I don't know. I'm a little bit scared. I'm a bit concerned.
Oh, we'll probably do one every month or every 2 months at most. I think we've got enough else going on that this will be very much a side project that we do for fun occasionally. So there'll be enough time to read. Yeah, but I did want to go around, since you mentioned that you read the whole series already. I did want to go around and talk a little bit about how far the group has gotten with the Discworld books and so on. Like, maybe Alex, do you want to start?
In terms of Discworld, I've read everything except for the Tiffany Aching series. I never got
Nice.
around to that. I don't know why.
Tut tut.
And Chris?
I have read the first three just. So as things go, I've sort of read one every 6 months. And yeah, I'll maybe just say that these first two are just fine.
And Jose, you've read the whole series. How
I've
long
read
did
the
that
whole-
take you?
I've read the whole thing, including the Tiffany Aching books. I think I may not have read. I think it's the Amazing Maurice and his Amazing Rodents. I'm not entirely sure that's actually part of Discworld. It's like some kind of weird standalone there. And I think there's an illustrated one about Cohen the Barbarian, and I haven't read, but the main series and the Tiffany Aching books I for sure have read. So that's like, what, 41 plus books?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
It is indeed.
Two veterans and two newish readers. I made my way through the first 6 books of the series. I got up to Weird Sisters, and then I restarted them on audiobook because Penguin was redoing all the audiobooks with these
That's right.
narrators that I am very fond of. And I'm glad I did. I'm all the way up to Sorcery now. I'm from Equal Rights onwards. I started listening to these with my husband during our commute, and that's a lot of fun because I get to share the books with him. But and then I reread The Color of Magic and half of Light Fantastic for our discussion today. So what I found is The Color of Magic and the Light Fantastic, of the 6 books I've read, yes, they were my least favorite, but I mean, I really enjoyed them the first time as well because I'm a fan of, I guess I just love this kind of humor. And I know that from the fact that I love P.G. Woodhouse and Douglas Adams, and this is very much in the same, I guess, area of humor. But I didn't think that I would enjoy them on a reread. Like, I thought I would be bored because I got a little bit bored during my first read of the first 2 books. I enjoyed all the jokes, but all the stuff in between, not so much. But with the audiobooks, Colin Morgan, who is doing the Wizard books of the Discworld redone audiobooks, he is a fantastic narrator, and he does all kinds of voices. He's brilliant, and his take on Rincewind and Two Flower, I really enjoyed. So the second time I enjoyed, it was largely due to the audiobook, I thought. And then I reread this physically this time, and I liked it even more. So it was interesting to me that the least favorite books grew on me so much on rereads. I'm curious what the later books will do. But yeah, I really enjoyed them. And so this is where we find out the world is set up with the what the turtle swimming through space and the elephants and the disc on top. Did that premise draw you in the first time? It made me laugh out loud, like right from the first time I grabbed this book. But was that something you already knew going in the first time you read these books, or did you sort of shake your head at it but enjoyed the rest of it, so it sort of grew on you? Like, what were your impressions of that?
That
Go
one
on,
will-
Alex.
Yeah. Better one first.
Well, in terms of the actual world itself, the fact that it's a disc on the back of 4 elephants on the back of the great Hatchwin turtle, I just kind of accepted that as, yep, that's the world. That's how it is. Makes complete sense to me that everybody lives on this disc. I do wonder if it was Terry Pratchett taking a bit of a dig at the Flat Earth Society. Yes, you can have your flat Earth in a fantasy world. But yeah, I mean, I just accepted it as that's the world he created. It made me. I've thought about it more, and it made me laugh more when you get to one of the guards' books called The Fifth Elephant, and you learn that there was actually a fifth elephant involved, or a legend of a fifth elephant.
Interesting.
In terms of the reread, I mean, I'd forgotten how much I liked Cohen the Barbarian when he crops up in the Light Fantastic. And the warning of never become a legend in your own lifetime.
Yeah. That's the danger of Varsha as well. I'll speak to the elephants and the turtles. I have to say, it was something that always put me off the series for years because it was not serious fantasy. Come on, this is just this is way the other side of dumb in a lot of ways, and because of that, I'm out. And I have to say, even a couple of books in the series, I still don't like it, but it does frame the series as different, if you know what I mean, from that, because I would say definitely these 2 books, Equal Rights definitely just changed, but the plot is sort of irrelevant in a lot of ways. It's funny reading them, kind of going, these are definitely character books. There are definitely plot elements that happen, and in fact, it's weird that the one book runs into the other one in this case, as if they needed another book to finish this plot, which is sort of like a series of encounters more than necessarily this overarching story that goes. Although I suppose Rincewind's spell thing definitely has some meaning there in the world. But yeah, it's kind of like not serious fantasy in the same way as if somebody else told you there was a 41 book series of another fantasy series that was serious. That would put you off for a completely different reason. And yeah, so it's an interesting framing device, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I'm very much like Chris. My first encounter with Discworld was back in '98, because I remember that's when I moved to the UK from Spain. So Pratchett is a very quintessentially British uh, writer. So my background was Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Lord of the Rings, serious fantasy. And then I remember seeing in one of my, in the halls of residence, one of my mates' bedroom, he had like the first few novels. And you see, those iconic Paul Kitby, the original covers, right?
Yes.
And it's like, this is not serious. And I rejected it for a long time because it's not serious. Fantasy has to be serious. And eventually I bit the bullet, and I think when I went back home for Christmas, I bought the first two in Spanish. And it was weird. It's just something completely different from, it's totally unexpected. But I think definitely, I don't know why I kept with the series. And it's definitely, if you read in publication order, I think it's definitely a grower, because if I remember correctly, isn't there, in these first two books, there's an almost cataclysm averted in the last minute,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's a recurring thing from the first few books until things settle down. So it's all very weird, like all this, I don't know, like nothing I've ever read before or after, to be honest.
I have to say, I also would have judged people that I went to school with that were in the Discworld who said they read Discworld and said they were fantasy fans, and shake my head and go, obviously not. Not with the elephants and the turtles and the whatever else. You're a literary snob in fantasy terms.
You're a
Yeah, what an
fantasy
idiot.
snob.
What an idiot.
I've got just hearing Jose say he came across it in '98.
Yeah,
Got
I
a
don't know.
horrible feeling I picked the first one up in around about '89.
Oh, wow. But it's quite amazing. The first one came out in '83, wasn't it?
Yeah,
So he was churning them out at one point, 2 books a year. And obviously, even in '98, he must have been only halfway through the series, I reckon. But yeah, it's a peculiar series. And I don't know, like, because I read it in publication order, and I've made a couple of videos about Discworld and about reading orders and jumping in points and stuff. But I cannot imagine jumping into this series in book 7 and just follow one of the sets of characters like the guards or the witches or whatever,
Yeah.
because I think the great payoff is to see the world grow as the series goes on, and to get the inside jokes of the series, isn't it? Like Alex said before, you meet Cohen the Barbarian in the Light Fantastic, but then he does come up randomly in other books, and then you start making those connections and links, and I think that's really rewarding. But to say to someone that you're gonna read 7 novels before you start reaping the rewards sounds like a crazy proposition.
Yeah. I wonder if they, like, you sort of pick up on the inside, not necessarily inside jokes, but I know sometimes I read, let's say, retellings of something and then go read the original, and it hits differently, or books that are influenced by other books, and then I go read the book that they were influenced by, and I pick up on, oh, this might be something that they were influenced by. That's pretty cool. So I wonder if you read them out of order and you come back to, say, The Light Fantastic, and meet the librarian turned into an orangutan, not an orangutan, for the which should have been for the first time, but now you know that origin story. It's like your hero got a backstory. So I wonder if it reads differently that way. Yeah, but I'll never find out because I'm reading them in publication order. Alex, did you read them in publication order, or did you read them out of order?
I read them out of order. I read
Ethan.
The Colour of Magic and the Light Fantastic first, and then I just sort of randomly picked them up every now and then for a few years. And
Nice.
then when I got older, I just started buying them all when I had money to do so.
Nice.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
things like the Guards I have read over and over again, and the Witches, read them over and over again in order because
Mm.
it's such a good structured progression within those two groups. And later on, the Moist von Lipwig books as well, because they progress nicely one to another.
I'm excited to get there in about 3 or 4 years. uh,
Some of us are quite old here, Varsha. Some of us are against the ticking time clock. We're going to need to pick up the pace, I think, a little bit.
well, you sign up for a 15-year reading group, Chris.
I
What's
know,
3
but
or 4 years compared
I
to
mean,
that?
that was definitely a aspirational thing that I did there, rather than a serious commitment.
What was amazing to me, again, I think the first time, but I think I figured it out more towards the second and third times. The science that he's built around this world, like the fact that light travels slower than sound, and he has so many descriptions, like throughout all the books, that keeps coming up over and over again, how he describes sunrises and sunsets. It's so vivid about like how light flows across the Discworld. And oh, and you've read Equal Rights already. There's this intense scene featuring a sunrise in the third book. So yeah, I love that. And then there are some. I think we know how the the seasons work. There is a little footnote about it, and yeah, there's just a lot that he's built on this, and it had pretty early underpinnings in the first 2 books, which I think is brilliant. Um, yeah, I know I think he didn't plan to really write 40 books in the series until he got to about Mort. So it's interesting to me that he did, well, I haven't got to the later books, but he did build quite a lot, even in the first 6, 7 books, on what he set up in the first 2 books.
There is actually, and I was just checking to see who wrote it, a Science of the Discworld book out there.
There's actually 3 of them, and they were written with a mathematician, a professor, Ian Stewart, and a science professor, Jack Cohen. And I know this because I was at the ceremony where Sir Terry Pratchett was awarded his first honoris causa doctorate. My university, Warwick, was the first one to give him the honorary doctorate. And they did a presentation, all 3 authors, they did a talk. And then there was a book signing. So I met Sir Terry, and I've got the first Science of Discworld book signed by all 3 of them. And also he signed for me Feet of Clay at the time.
Wow.
And anecdote, in return for his honoris causa, Sir Terry Pratchett made Ian Stewart and Jack Cohen honorary professors of Unseen University. So, but the story that's not the anecdote. When they write academic papers and they put all the letters after their name, all the titles, both Ian Stewart and Jack Cohen, they write PhD honoris causa UU, which is obviously Unseen University. And let me go. I'll show you the book. Carry on. I'll go. It's there on my shelf.
Okay.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's such a great story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about it, because, you know, as I said before, my opinion of Discworld that it was dumb. It's actually the very opposite of dumb as a series, in terms of not just language, but actually it is very clever and smartly playful in a lot of ways. Oh, it spins.
It spins.
That's pretty cool.
Because that was the thing about Sir Terry Pratchett as well. He had a little tagline for every one of his books when he dedicated them to people. So in Science of Discworld, the tagline was "It spins," and then he'll dedicate it on feet of clay. Mine says a word in your head, because it references the golems and how they worked. So he had a little tagline for each of his different novels, so the kind of quasi-personalized dedications of his works.
Ooh, I love that. Yes. Now I want to go look up what he did for every single book.
Well, there's the famous anecdote where someone brought him, you can find the picture on the internet, someone brought him an already dedicated book by him to sort of re-sign. So he got a T-Pex out, T-Pexed out his original signature, and wrote officially unsigned, and signed it again.
Wonderful.
That's a lot of effort to put into a book signing, which is so cool to do that. Yeah. Sorry, Chris, you were saying about
No, I
the
was
series.
I was pretty much finished. My point is the fact that it is playful rather than, you know, what appears to be a dumb take in fantasy. It's not. It's setting up the fact that this is playing with either the themes of fantasy, themes of science, themes of language, all of that kind of stuff. And it's, if anything, it's an incredibly intelligent book. And again, those bloody literary snobs, fantasy snobs, they were right again. I was the dumb one.
And it does the thing that a lot of comedians I love do, which is make very interesting observations about our world and make you think and look deeper in the form of humor, which is fantastic. And I always enjoy that. And this book has a lot to recommend itself in that department. Well, the series as a whole, I think. So with that, shall we talk about the Discworld's first tourist? And that's an intense threat that everybody wants to stop, and rightly so, because the first thing he does is sell insurance for fire damage. and the whole city burns down. And he's got a very interesting name, Two Flower.
Two Flower, yeah.
Two Flower, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go on, Alex,
go on, Jose.
No. You
Fight.
I was going to say, Two Flower is the world's greatest optimist. Everything that happens, he just has this wonderful air of, well, don't worry, it'll be all right.
Somebody must have a solution.
Yeah, something will crop up and it'll all be fine, and I need to get a picture of it.
Yes.
I mean, he's not wrong in a lot of ways. You know, that's sort of what happens.
Yep. And with Rincewind's luck. Was that you were saying?
No, like I said, as a first encounter with the series, it's really hard. Like you got the luggage, this sort of sentient, chest of clothes with feet that just has a mind of its own. And I wonder, because I think Sir Terry had a deep knowledge of the fantasy lore and a lot of genres of literature, whether that luggage wasn't his take on, for anyone familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, with the mime monster, which looks like a chest, but actually turns into a biting sort of. Whether that wasn't his take on that. I think there are so many references throughout the books, because to me, Two Flower reminded me, being a bit, not very PC, this about those Japanese tourists that used to come to my hometown, with this fancy camera, just taking pictures of everything. He's got that sort of air about it, and whether that was his take on all those things.
The introduction to sorcery has a bit of an origin story for luggage. What you said is probably true. Maybe that's where he fit it in. But he talked about how he saw a woman struggling with a giant suitcase across a pavement, and it felt like it had a life of its own, and that's how luggage was born. It has a life of its own, and I think sorcery gets a lot more POVs. The luggage gets its own POV in sorcery, which is fantastic.
Yeah, the bigger problem for me is that Tooflar is a kind of nothing. He's a one-note character in that way. Like he is just kind of this thing that comes into the world and sort of introduces a lot of ills or otherwise. Like it's sort of the idea of capitalism or working the system. This kind of idea of selling insurance. Insurance? What's insurance? What can we do with insurance? Why would we need insurance? Here, go for this amount of money, and then people think, right, he's like almost like the person that comes from inside and just plants a little seed, and then innocently, and then watches society eat itself a little bit. But the fact that Luggage is probably the most interesting character out of the three of them between Rincewind, Tooflar, and Luggage. Um, in one hand is novel and inventive, but it's sort of like takes a while to get your head around the fact that he's the star of the show in some ways.
The luggage.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And
It's the faithful dog that saves the day.
Yeah, that is that character, yeah.
and I think he does this really well with objects that seem human, like the talking sword Kring. And every time we described his voice, it sounded like something scraping against something, right? Like the description was equivalent to that. And then the sword just won't shut up about all the places it has been and all the things it has done and how how it has been in multiple worlds. I think at one point it said that it's Excalibur, right? Because it said I was at the bottom of a lake once, and it had many names across all the dimensions or all. I don't know. Anyway, he does human feeling no objects. I think really well.
Yeah, it's almost like it's anthropomorphized from animals, in that kind of way, and it plays with that with that idea, and then develops it obviously with Talking Sword, and then you sort of get this feeling that the characters can take any form in that world,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be just this named famed character like Krun or Cohen or otherwise that are obviously takes and things. It can also be a thing within the world. It can be a tree. It can be a piece of the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but like I mentioned before, the whole sentient sword thing, that's also an element of the Elric saga, which started publishing in the 60s. So again, I think he again borrowed something from traditional sword and sorcery and put his own spin. And I think throughout the series, throughout the books, he does that. And it's only as I've read more and more that I've started to appreciate and remember things from Discworld that I wasn't aware at the time. And a lot of things, they are the traditional tropes, but always with a Pratchett spin on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the first two books really lean into that. I am not well read enough in fantasy, and I've never played Dungeons and Dragons, but I think from what I've heard that the first two books are Pratchett sort of, I don't know, parodying the common fantasy tropes and the common D&D stuff, I think. And the overarching thing that's happening in the first book is a bunch of gods playing what looks like a D&D game, right? and getting Rincewind and Tooflower all over the place and protecting their characters to the point where one of the gods wants to have them killed because he's sick of the one he's playing against. Keep winning against him with these two.
Yeah, but isn't that as well a take on the ancient Greek gods that used to do that? They used to sort of challenge each other, and they had their chosen heroes do deeds and stuff like that. Again, it's one of those things that I think in the back of my mind he was also parodying as well.
Yeah, it's also quite possibly the parody of the idea that these characters in this kind of setting is classical D&D campaign, and that in some ways the events that are happening in the book are very much that encounter scenario, dice roll kind of thing that's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what's brilliant about this. Like, I haven't played D&D, and I maybe should have caught it in the first time. But the first time I read it, I was like, yeah, he's talking about how gods play with humans, and without a care for their well-being or their life or anything, just serve your own purposes with it. That's the commentary here. But then this time around, I'm like, oh, the D&D players, they're gods to their characters. So it works on multiple levels, that setup.
I think if we're going to talk about the gods, we have to take a moment to appreciate the fact that they live on the top of a spike called Dun Manifesting, which is just the best name for a place for gods ever.
Uh,
Yes. That was excellent. Oh, and there are astrozoologists on the world whose goal in life is to find out whether Great Atuin is male or female. That's I think one of the opening prologue introductions, right? And it plays a role later on in the last section of the first book. But yeah, I think the sending of 8, Two Flower, typical tourist, wants to take pictures of the great spider, of course. And Rincewind has a thumb show up when he takes the picture, which is so unfortunate. But
It gives us a little introduction and an insight into the patrician as well.
You see, I
yes.
can't remember. Does it really feature in book 1?
He does. He's very brief. He orders Rincewind to make sure that Two Flower survives and goes
yes,
back
that's
with
him,
a
yeah.
favourable report of Ankh-Morpork.
Wow.
Yes, he I think he causes a disbalance to the economics of Ankh-Morpork because he's brought all this gold. And he's not very rich where he comes from, but gold has a lot of value here. I think the continent that Two Flowers from is made of gold or has a lot of gold, so that's their currency. But in Ankh-Morpork, there was this scene, I think, where was it an alchemist, checks the gold coin that Two Flower paid the innkeeper to see if it's real gold, and he says, this is not like any of the gold coins that we have. And the innkeeper starts to get angry, like, I knew this must be fake. And he says, no, look, the coins that we have that are gold coins, they are actually only like 30% gold. This is 100% gold.
I think that's another thing, to get past as a first-time reader. The fact that the main city where a lot of the action takes place is called Ankh-Morpork. Like, you cannot take it seriously. Obviously, it's not meant to be, but if you approach it with that mindset, there's a lot of hurdles, I think, to get over in the first few books.
Yeah. And I love how every description of Ankh-Morpork starts as if it's going to describe the great beauty and wonder of the city, but really talks about how garbage it is, but using the same language.
I mean, the
What do you say?
name never confused me. It's on the River Ankh, and the Morpork is a local owl, which you don't find out until much, much later on. Well, obviously it's on the River Ankh, but I think the first time they mentioned the owl is I think it's when Commander Vimes is going to get his coat of arms done in one of them.
Right.
And they talk about the Ankh-Morpork crest.
And it's an owl.
Yeah, the Morpork is an owl.
Wow.
But-
It's sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but it has this idea from the very start that sort of anything's possible. Everything's got sort of a slightly weird name. He has this play on archetypes and literary lore that he has before, and he can sort of have a jumping off point for a story just like in every corner of the world. It can be the name of something, it can be the interactions of certain things, or it can be, a group of people, as it is often throughout the series.
Yeah. One of my favorite jokes in the beginning was when Rincewind when Two Flower wants to take pictures of things, and Rincewind says the madman will give you gold. There is an imp in the box that draws pictures. The madman will give you gold if you pose for it, right? And then it turns out that that's true. There is an actual imp. He comes out and yells at Two Flower that I'm out of pink. I can't do color anymore. I can only do black and white from now on.
Like a printer. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so that's really cool. Like what you were saying, Chris, about anything is possible. I feel like from the first two books, I got the impression that the magicians are sort of the engineers of this world, and the magical things are what make things work, like the imp in the picture box, and the wizards, the hydrophobes that repel water to run that magical lens thing that takes them from. Oh, we have to talk about Tethys. Tethys is home to the last city, and yeah, so magic makes things work, but Rincewind doesn't like it. He wants to be able to channel lightning and make electricity out of it, and the imp laughs at him for thinking like that. It's like, oh, that's just fantasy. When Rincewind wants to do science from our world, which I thought was very cool.
He builds on the imp technology as well as you go through the books. So
Nice.
There are books later on with more examples of more advanced imp technology.
Interesting. I want to moving pictures. Is that still featuring cameras with imps? And another thing that was interesting was Rincewind. He's a terrible wizard here, but in the alternate reality, when he imagines himself a dragon, which, by the way, happens to be an airplane, he's actually a nuclear scientist. So he is a competent physicist in a world. So he was good at what he did. He was just not suited for Discworld. He's not good at magic because at heart, he's a scientist. Was there anything else about the color of magic? We'll probably come back to some jokes or stories here as we talk about light fantastic, but should we?
I suppose in general to these, all books, but if I remember correctly, because in Discworld there are no chapters, but I think the first books, did they have like 2 or 3 chapters only?
No chapters?
No chapters at all in the first 2.
Not at all. No, it's a flowing.
Yeah, and again, that's another thing to get over, isn't it? When you like, where do I put the bookmark? Because obviously we know that fold in the corner of the page makes you automatically an evil person. But so like,
you're damn right there.
Where did you stop reading? It's strange.
I struggled with that a lot, Jose. I have to say, like that was something I thought I'm never going to get on with these books at all. Like even in these editions, which are just the most beautiful thing, where they give you the ribbon to go along and do it. It is you're often looking for that spot that. But next time I pick this up, would I know to start there? Would I not? And I'm not writing on the book. I'm not kind of going to do it. But and also, for somebody that maybe a bit OCD or otherwise, but the idea that when you sit down to read, I'm going to read 20 pages of this, or I'm going to read to the end of the chapter or something, it doesn't have that nice crisp part of where you should finish. But it also does encourage you to find, I think by the end of a couple of the books, it encourages you to find a place where you feel satisfied, rather than just kind of having an arbitrary place to stop or something like that. So it's like, I'll get to the end of this little bit here, and it can compel you to read on, or you can just say, right, okay, I know where I'm at then. But it is very different, and I was like, oh my god, imagine this for read-alongs, like chapter by chapter. What would we do, Varsha? Like this would be, honestly, it's hard enough to say to the end of chapter 5, and we all get that wrong. True. Yeah,
we just say page numbers. We have to use,
but then we're all on different editions.
Yes, different editions.
You just have to say something like, "I'll keep reading until we get to the end of until they escape from the Wormburg."
Yeah.
But what if they escape from the Wormburg twice in one book? Alex, what about then?
And how do you know that? How do you know that if you haven't read it? So you always need somebody that's experienced enough to have read the book to know what's coming. It's an absolute internet nightmare. Again, another kind of in joke by Mr. Pratchett. You know, he's way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
So what I use as stopping point is the little page gaps that come between sections when he changes the scene. But I mean, in my head, those are chapters now. You still can't like use them for read-alongs, but they serve as stopping points for a reading session. Oh, we forgot to talk about Death, who is introduced in the first book and who chases Rincewind with a bit of a vengeance throughout the first book. I think he gives up by the time we get to Light Fantastic. But I guess the interactions in the first book are slightly less interesting, but in Light Fantastic, when they conduct that ceremony, what is it called? Ashk Enk, where they summon Death, the wizards, and Death is like, yeah, just get on with it. Tell me what you want. I have a party to get back to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it already strikes me after in these first two books with these kind of characters like Death, etc. that come in. It almost has that British sitcom feel of, you know, the neighbour that comes in next door. The door opens and the audience starts cheering. You know, because they only appear every like 10 episodes or something, and they're a popular character, that kind of thing. It sort of gives off that appeal. And even when I got to like when you get the equal rights and stuff, when Death's a much more prominent role in it, you're like, yes, we can even spend even more time with these kind of fringe characters from the other books and kind of get in. It has that kind of feel.
Does it feel like Death steals the show when it appears? Like it's a character that, and obviously we got more of Death because, as we know, what's his face? Pratchett's friend. Come on.
Neil Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman said to him to write a book about Death because he was one of the most compelling characters in there. But automatically, you know, those block capitals when Death talks, it's so compelling that you want to find out more, isn't it?
It's the little descriptions along with the block capitals, like he intoned with the sound of 1,000 coffin lids snapping shut.
Voice heavy as neutronium.
I mean, not only does Death steal the scene when he's in it, he steals the scene when he's in it by proxy. Because one of the bits I always remembered the most from The Colour of Magic before I went through it again was when Scroffula turns up in place of Death.
Oh yes. That was one of my favorite scenes. Yes, the and Rincewind, yeah, he's busy stalking the streets of some police, and because there's a plague there, and then this other guy shows up, and he uses a heavy voice, or Rincewind thinks it is maybe, and it's like, nope, I'm not coming with you. I can't die by death. What is happening to me? And Scruffler's like, I'm mucking this up, aren't I?
Nobody's ever died of Scroffula.
Yeah. One of my absolute favorite jokes, I think, is in the first book of Discworld, when Kring tells him we have to go rescue them, and I don't remember, I can't find the page, but it was to the effect that the idea of a rescue was so far at the back of his mind that if some advanced theories of the universe were to be taken into account, it was actually right in front of him. The universe is circular or whatever. So I love that joke. I love how deep that was.
I think there's lots of very clever literary jokes, but I do think the end of it, when they kind of survive the drop to death, they imagine the airplane to save them, or when Two Flower kind of falls asleep and this imaginary dragon disappears, all that kind of stuff. But the actual the flat Earth basically is going to kill them in some ways. I sort of I could really resonate with that as again as being this kind of play on in a world fantasy world, with dragons and all of that kind of stuff in it, that actually the thing that might defeat them or cause them great peril is actually the physics of the world and the kind of the dumbness of a flat Earth and how stupid that would be in its own right. That was the bit that kind of tickled me in that point quite a lot.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't think of that. But on the subject of dragons, I did love the fact that imagination brings them alive. And Two Flower has such a vivid imagination that he brought this huge dragon that none of the other people did. You just have to believe. And he names him 9 Reeds. I wanted to ask, Jose, you said you read the first 2 books in Spanish. How did the literary jokes, like the wordplay jokes, translate? And
be able to tell you. I read them a long time ago. I couldn't remember. Yeah, sorry about that.
No.
Because after that, every other book I picked up in English. I guess he never had a really, like, his writing style is not overly convoluted. And I think a lot of the jokes are more like this kind of weird explanations or more slapstick situational comedy. There's no, I could be wrong here, but I don't recall it being like a particularly clever puns that won't translate necessarily well into other languages, unless Alex tells me otherwise.
No, I think I agree with you on that one. That's one of the things I love about it is the fact that they're just so readable. There's no attempt to overly tricky prose that will confuse you and have you rooting through a thesaurus trying to remember what that word means.
Yeah.
It's quite hard to pull that off though in its own right, without it sounding kind of or feeling eye rolly all the time insofar as like a dad joke. It sort of is like a dad joke you'd really thought about, and was clever in some ways,
But still a dad joke.
Well, I mean, there's still puns that are still kind of a very heavy wordplay, but they feel well thought out. They feel clever rather than kind of the lowest common denominator that a dad joke tends to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think even when he repeats a joke, like the death one is arguably a joke repeated over and over, but it works every single time because he does it just enough differently that it works. So the Light Fantastic is the Discworld's own version of Don't Look Up. There's a comet coming closer and closer, and everybody's going mad, trying to figure out what the heck is up. The end of the world is coming, and Rincewind, of all people, saves the day because he had a spell climb into his head when he was at Unseen University. And that's why he can't memorize any other spells afterwards, because all the other spells are afraid of the great spell that made its way into his head. So thoughts on that?
Well, I love the idea that all the other spells are scared of the great spell, which is, it gives almost sentience and personality to the magic, which you don't always get in other books. I think there are a few out there that have sort of living, breathing magic, but this makes it feel like the magic has an actual personality.
Oh, I love that. Go ahead.
And is it the reason why he's such a poor wizard? I think it's the excuse why he's such a poor wizard when you actually delve into his character. I think he has serious application issues.
But I do like how, like, often a fantasy book is about the hero's journey, and we have Rincewind who comes across as a bit of an oaf, a bit, well, he wants to basically con too far out of his money at the very, very start of it, all of that kind of stuff. But that once you get to know him, you're like, oh, here's a reason. Oh, he's going to be great at this stage. But you sort of underlyingly know that it's just, even with the reaction of how other people treat Rincewind about the fact that he has this, that he was never a great student to start off with, you know, he was never going to be the top of the tree. But it's like, again, sort of playing with this very common trope of fantasy novels that there's a reason why somebody's being held back, and once they're freed from that power or the taint or whatever else you want to talk about, they will grow and become magnificent. And yet there's sort of, like you say, this underlying feeling of, but maybe not in this case.
Yeah. And I think, if I remember correctly, he was already going to be expelled, and consuming the great spell prevented his expulsion because they needed to keep that around, I think. Yeah. But to the point of the magic being a living, breathing thing, this scene, there's a scene where all the 8 spells are talking to Rincewind. They are debating the origin of the universe, how the universe came about, and he realized that he's inside the Octavo. I thought that scene was brilliant. And they talk about, in the beginning there was the word, and then they have some other options about what else could have been, and then one of them says, "Excuse me, in the beginning was the clearing of the throat," and then that was the word.
I like the fact that later on it then references that the Octavo's talking to him again, and Rincewind in his lovely, often sarcastic and irritable way goes, "Have you remembered how the world started yet?"
And we meet Cohen the Barbarian, who, like Alex told us earlier, that we meet again later, but his introduction scene, he's rolling up tobacco to make a cigarette, and some of that tobacco has been continuously smoked since the beginning, since the first time, and so now it has the consistency of tar. I excuse me. Yeah, I loved that introduction for him. And when all the barbarians sit around talking about what they want, what they want from life, and he says, a nice bed, clean, what's a good pair of teeth, and some toilet paper or something like that. It's like, yeah, he's lived to be 87. He just wants to be comfortable.
I think there's a phrase he comes up with where he says, "Yes, I've been a barbarian for so many years, and what's it got me? A bunch of scars and several recipes for soup."
Yeah. Because he doesn't have teeth. Yeah, there was. Oh, what was I going to say? What do you guys think of the whole trolls catching philosophy and dying of it, becoming stone out of it?
It's a play in The Hobbit, isn't it, surely?
Well, they do say also that in, I think it's in The Light Fantastic, somebody says everybody knows trolls turn to stone in sunlight. But I think he drops all of that in later books.
Right.
Because certainly in the music one, I can't remember what it's called now.
Not soul music.
Yeah, it could be soul music, where there's a band with a sort of half-elf lead singer and a troll drummer. He happily wanders around the whole time. And you've got Sergeant Detritus in the Guards. He doesn't seem to have a problem going out in daylight.
Maybe they're more evolved species of troll.
Well, he brings in a whole thing about the way trolls are made of stone and have a sort of silicon brain. So he sort of covers it off by saying in hot weather, trolls slow down because their brain is basically a superconductor. In cold weather, their brain works really efficiently, so the colder the troll is, the more intelligent the troll is.
Mm.
25 books later becomes crucial in one of the novels, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um,
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, the trolls, when they turn to stone, and then sometimes they catch the philosophy bug, and then they just stay stones. They forget to wake up. I thought that bit was brilliant. They don't really die of old age, but they catch philosophy as a disease. Uh, there was another scene in the in the second book that I really thought was excellent. In I think there's some priest of some temple who's denouncing the wizards for not doing anything to protect the world from the upcoming apocalypse. Let's go burn all the magicians. And Rincewind sees death there and asks him, "You, this must be great for you because it's so much death is coming your way." And he says something to the effect that like normal death he understands, but this death of the mind he has trouble wrapping his head around, which was a fantastic thing for Death to say. And I think later on he sort of doubles down on the aspect of how he just is. He doesn't have any emotions, and there's a lot of philosophical discussions around death, and he does that excellently with Death as a character.
I think one of my favourite jokes in the Light Fantastic was when they were on their way out of the enchanted forest at the start. And I think this is where it was. Rincewind's chatting away and somebody answers him. And he sort of like says, "Yeah, I agree with you. You're not a talking tree, are you?" And this thing goes, "No, of course I'm not. I'm a rock. Trees can't talk."
Yeah.
But of course, Rincewind has just encountered talking trees.
Yeah, he's just finished a conversation with a talking tree.
Yeah.
And now he's got a talking rock telling him that trees can't talk.
You idiot.
Oh, I love that. In speaking of the one note tourist two flower, in the beginning of Light Fantastic, he sees a gnome and he refuses to believe it's a gnome because it doesn't have a red hat like he saw in his picture books.
At least he had the decency to be embarrassed about the book.
Yeah, it's true. That's why he got all his elf lore, that they're supposed to be noble and brilliant. And the gnome is telling him, no, they just steal our teeth. Is that noble and brilliant thing from Lord of the Rings, do you think? Or, I don't know, are there any other noble and brilliant takes on elves that aren't building on top of Lord of the Rings?
well, actually, the elves in Discworld are not the elves of Lord of the Rings. They are
No.
the traditional elves of British law, where they are these sort of evil forest creatures. So no, but it's true. So again, coming from a background of traditional fantasy literature, to have that juxtaposed or like dark side of the elves presented in these books is yet another readjustment that you have to make. With the elves are not this noble, high-born race of wonderful creatures.
Yeah.
They're calculating evil bastards. Torture things for fun.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
It is a bit of a misconception that Tolkien's elves were all fair and noble, because a lot of the Silmarillion is based around the fact that one group of elves, the Noldor, were basically so consumed with the Silmarils that they turned into a bunch of evil, manipulative bastards who killed their own kind.
Yeah, I think, but that's a kind of sort of a willingness to do good, or a drive to be good and high and mighty, that turns you into an arrogant twat, basically. which is the story of the Noldor in the Silmarillion, whereas the elves in Discworld are these naturally
Oh yeah, in
evil,
Discworld they're just
conniving creatures.
yeah, they're horrible.
Yeah, and they're not like tall and fair. They are these, sort of more like gnarly pixie style
And
creatures.
he describes them a bit like it's a bit like a cat.
Yeah.
A cat is evil. A cat is horrible. A cat tortures its prey, but it's furry, so we love it.
So the elves are well loved in Discworld.
There's a misconception about the elves in Discworld. What people remember elves to be in the Discworld isn't what elves are. And the witches know this, which is where you find out all this stuff.
Interesting.
I think it's lords and ladies.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's the first. Yeah. That's right. That's the one. Yeah. That's the one.
Interesting. Nice. Lots of fun to look forward to. Anything else about these books?
Remind me then, footnotes?
Yes. There are a few in these too.
Which
Yay.
how does that work in the audiobook?
Bill Nye.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how the original audiobooks did it, but the new editions of the audiobooks, they have a recurring actor, like the same actor for the voice of death throughout, and the same actor for the voice to do the footnotes. And each sub-series has its own narrator. Like Colin Morgan was for all the wizard books, Indra Varma for all the witches books. So Bill Nye, like Alex said, is doing the voice
Peter
of the footnotes.
Serafinovich's death, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, which is brilliant, I think.
Yeah.
The voice of Darth Maul.
Yes.
But so when you get to a footnote, do they interrupt the narrative right there, or you finish the paragraph? How does it work? Because when you're reading and you see a footnote, you got it on the back of your mind, and you can kind of read it whenever you feel like. But during the narration, how do they deal with that?
They go straight to it, I think, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
You get a
They play a
shimmering bit
tiny-
of music.
Yeah. Shimmering, I like that description. Shimmering music. And then you come back to it. Yeah, which feels a bit like the star, the asterisk in the that leads to the footnote, right? Yeah. That's pretty cool. And I love that he uses footnotes to explain the world and how the seasons work. It's really cool. Yeah, I think I'm out of talking points. Was there anything else that others had to bring up about these first two books?
One thing I did think rereading them was, and it's probably, I think it's deliberate, and I think it's as a result of Rincewind being the main character. But compared to other books, they feel far more chaotic and spontaneous in everything that happens. And I think it is a result of the fact that Rincewind generally just stumbles from one catastrophe to the next. Whereas the other books, you see more of a plan, a logical progression, more of a developing storyline as you go through it.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, there's a lot of contributing factors to that, right? There's the fact of the 4 or 5, rather, if you take the first two books together, disconnected narratives for just like they're off adventuring and you start somewhere completely different from where you left off in the previous one. And then there's just the fact of the dice that makes it chaotic, right? But also Rincewind brings chaos wherever he goes. So yeah, I agree with that. Sorry, go ahead, Jose.
No, I was going to say, so how did you feel about Rincewind as a character? So, because you've only read 3 books, you said, right?
I've read 3, Varsha's read 5, yeah?
Right.
Something like that, yeah.
So, okay, so for you guys that haven't read more of the series, how do you feel about Rincewind as a main character that you want to see more stories based around?
Hmm.
Yeah, for me, it's a struggling one because, like I say, these two floor definitely Rincewind less so. At least Rincewind's got a bit of progression in Life Fantastic that he has got rid of the spell out of his head and he's maybe has his life can start proper has been held behind, but he isn't actually compelling in the way that even by the time I get to book three, a lot of those characters are way more compelling than Rincewind was. So maybe if I hadn't got the three yet, I wouldn't be quite as down, being the wrong word, but not as quite as invested as I would be. He's fine. A bit like I think it's one of the things that holds these two books back in some ways is that idea of give me a couple of central characters that are really a delight every time they appear on the page. Whereas for these first two books, it's the people like Death that only appear in the side, Run, Cohen, etc. They're the interesting characters. They're where the fun is. Whereas, but that obviously gets fixed, I think, in book three, quite a bit for me.
And you, sure?
I think, yeah, I found Rincewind somewhat boring to read the first time. But he's really grown on me over the course of the two rereads. And I mean, I'm rereading Sorcery on audiobook, and I'm enjoying that a lot more, possibly because I did the first two books again. So it's basically my sixth encounter with Rincewind. And now I feel like I understand him and where he comes from. Like, he just wants a normal, boring life. He doesn't want adventure, and he's being dragged into it. So, based on that premise, everything that happens to him becomes hilarious later on. But my first encounter with him found him somewhat boring. So, mostly The Color of Magic, I read on for the jokes. Same with Light Fantastic. And characters didn't intrigue me very much, but they've grown on me. Like, I've grown fond of them and I care for them over the course of rereads somehow. Maybe because I know at least three books into their journey, and so now they feel a bit more like familiar and friendly, I guess. But as a first encounter, not very much.
I've got a question for you, Jose.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a deliberate construct that Granny Weatherwax, who's pretty much the main witch in all of the books, is almost the complete opposite of Rincewind, who is the main wizard character in the books?
Don't know. I wouldn't put it past Sir Terry Pratchett to have done that. But I think no, because Alex, you're opening a can of worms because the witches and the wizards are opposites in every possible way, right? So
Yep.
obviously, like the basic one, the wizards are male and the witches are female, but then the wizards are all organized in Unseen University, and the witches all live in Hamletian covens of three. So it's all very disorganized. The witches are all this they are this sort of crazy bunch at Unseen University, right? Was it the Bursar? The Bursar is is renowned to be crazy, and he needs to take his dried frog pills. That's right. Whereas the witches are all, Granny Weatherwax. When we get there, she uses headology, which is sort of the Pratchettian version of psychology. So
Yeah.
it's really, so I wouldn't put it past it that she is the opposite of Rincewind, even though we found out that she had a fling with one of the wizards in her youth that we shall not reveal.
Mustrum Ridcully.
That's right.
Oh, there was a Weatherwax wizard in the second book, and
he was
are they related?
Yes, I think they are, because in a lot of the witches' books it mentions that the Weatherwaxes are a very magical family, and I'm sure at some point it says one of them was even the Chancellor of the Unseen University.
Okay. Cool. Oh, I love the scene in which I forget what happens to him because I only got halfway through my reread of The Light Fantastic, but this wizard who sets up all kinds of repellents against death and then locks himself in a box, but he doesn't put air holes in for himself. And then he finds death right there in the box next to Yeah. And then there's the overambitious wizard who, I don't know, who wants everything to be orderly and not chaotic. He wants more process in Unseen University. He has ideas about how he would do things if he were in charge. That was pretty funny. Yeah. Any other topics? Anything else? Okay. In that case, we will see. Oh, let's do outros, and then I will do the spiel. Jose, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. Right, so thank you very much for inviting me, Varsha, and people can find my opinions on book reviews and interviews over at my channel, Jose's Amazing Worlds, and all the interviews are in every podcast platform, Fantasy Talks Live. Thank you.
Alex.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. It's been quite funny, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Yeah, anyone can find me on page chewing, and every now and then I'll put something on Twitter that I think is funny and everybody ignores because it's not. And yeah, every now and then I'll drop into other people's podcasts and videos and talk my unique brand of inane rubbish on there as well.
No. And Chris.
Yes, and you should say, and to be an author, to be confirmed. That kind of that's on the pipeline. Yeah, my name is Chris Mullen. You can find me on the Chronicle Chris YouTube channel or on the Speculative Speculations podcast, and a bit like Alex, kind of popping in other random podcasts and things as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think we'll probably do the next book discussion in the upcoming month or so for Equal Rights, again by Terry Pratchett. It'll be the first introduction to the Witches sub-series, and we'll all meet Granny Weatherwax for the second. No, it's not the first introduction? No?
I've never classed Equal Rights as a witch's book.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we meet
It's
Granny
not?
Weatherwax for the first time.
Contention already.
Because it doesn't have the other two, does it?
No,
Yeah, it doesn't.
there's no Magrat.
Yeah.
There's no Nanny Og, and
Yeah.
I love Nanny Og.
Weird Sisters then would be our first witches book. This would be our first witch book. So we meet Granny Weatherwax for the first time. Next time we meet with Equal Rights. Until then, you can find us all hanging out on the Patreon forum, planning other reading groups and this one as well. And like I said in the beginning, if you're interested, please consider checking out the Patreon forum to talk to us about this or any other book. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon. Bye.